Sarah, dismissed by her wealthy family as a failure, reveals during a smug inheritance brunch that she's just acquired their entire real estate empire through her own company, Global Towers. The public revelation shatters their arrogance. 2 weeks later, they return begging for relief. She offers none. She repurposes the family mansion into an innovation hub for women and walks into the skyline as a self-made billionaire. The light in the Bennett dining room never simply arrived, it performed. It draped itself across the long mahogany table, kissed the cut crystals until they sparked, and made a stage of the silver as if applause were inevitable. My mother liked to schedule brunch for when the sun could be commanded. Control was her favorite garnish. "You'll take another?" The housekeeper hovered near Victoria's elbow with the mimosa pitcher, careful not to intrude upon perfection. Victoria's outfit did all the speaking anyway, a dress that cost more than the housekeeper's monthly wages, a smile she wore like an acquisition. "None for Sarah," my mother said, as if the syllables were medical advice. "She's driving back to her apartment." The word shined, then curdled in the air. Apartment. A box in a city. A choice instead of an inheritance. My father dabbed at the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin, precise and cold, the way men touch a map they already own. Now he began, and silverware stilled. "Your grandfather's estate is settled." He didn't need to look at the envelopes to know their weights. I didn't either. We had all practiced the scene in our heads, Victoria gracious in triumph, me polite in loss. There is a choreography to old money. The audience pretends not to notice the stagehands erasing everything that isn't gilded. My phone vibrated once, then quieted against my thigh. One line on the lock screen, "Final docs routed. Waiting on your go." I kept my expression neutral, the one I had mastered at 17 when my mother called my scholarship cute and asked whether computers were a phase. The butler refreshed water. The chandelier hummed. My father lifted the thicker envelope and turned to Victoria, who leaned forward, catching her reflection in the blade of a butter knife. "As the child who has shown commitment to the family firm," he said, presenting the envelope like a knighthood, "you'll receive the mansion and the associated portfolio." Victoria's laugh was delicate, practiced. "Daddy, it's perfect." The thinner envelope slid toward me. Paper whispered across polished wood. "And given your unconventional career trajectory, Sarah, the Cedar Street studio will suit your needs." There were 3 kinds of silence in that room. The first was the polite kind that refused to flinch. The second was the kind that enjoyed a scene. The third was the one I held inside my chest, where servers hummed and numbers clicked and large things moved quietly until it was time for them to arrive. "Property management," my mother said to the ceiling, to the gods of taste. Such a shame to see a mind squandered. Another vibration on my thigh. "Green light, press in 5. My sister tossed her hair and waggled the deed as if it were a ribbon. "Maybe one day you'll upgrade from your little complex." The light shifted. The stage waited. And for the first time, I let myself look full into the glass cabinet where the family silver slept and saw a clear reflection. A woman who had decided long ago to build in the dark, not to be invited into a room, but to own the building it was in. "Excuse me," I said softly, as my phone lit up my palm like a fuse. The hallway outside the dining room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old decisions. I stepped into it, the velvet hush swallowing the chatter behind me, and answered on speaker. "Amanda," I said. "Press is staged. Contracts are notarized." "We have full chain of title," she replied, efficient as always. "Your cue." In the corner alcove, a shelf held photographs from a curated past. Victoria at ribbon cuttings she didn't understand, my father shaking hands with men who pretended to like him, my mother in gowns that told stories about places she would never live. There was one photo of me at 12, half-cropped, hair frizzed, holding a trophy for a coding competition. The glass was smudged. I didn't wipe it. "Go," I said, and ended the call. When I came back, they were exactly as I had left them, which is the thing about people who believe the world is their mirror. Victoria's laughter tinkled like expensive ice. My mother complained about how renters ruined neighborhoods. My father rehearsed the lines he would soon deliver in an interview about legacy. I was saying, he resumed, that you could find a place at Bennett Investments. We'll start you in leasing. Someone has to learn the ropes. That's kind, I said, and placed my phone on the table face down. The screen pulsed once, as if to take a breath. In my pocket, a fold of paper warmed against my skin. The first sketch of the system I built in a dorm room, a lattice of checks and signals, pattern detection algorithms that caught the waste in bloat and the danger in shortcuts. Over the years it learned. Over the years I learned, too. I learned silence was a tool. I learned people who never check systems build their lives on assumptions. I learned the city was a ledger you could read if you stood in the right place long enough. Leasing is honest work, my mother added, which meant small. You'll see actual people. Might be good for you. People are my favorite dataset, I said, and sipped water to hide the smile. My father cleared his throat for the second act. You do have a car, don't you? That neighborhood of yours, he trailed off, afraid to say the parts of the city that made him uncomfortable. I thought of Mrs. Alvarez on the 4th floor who left tamales outside my office when I fixed the boiler ahead of a cold snap. I thought of the tenant meetings where we argued and then solved things. I thought of the night I watched Sterling Square's scaffolding sway in a wind it shouldn't have, and how my alerts lit up at 2 a.m. with safety violations someone had paid to hide. You could learn a lot here with us, he concluded, and the chandelier sparkled as if on cue. Somewhere else in the city, a newsroom layout editor dragged my photo into a template with the words Property Empress across the bottom. Somewhere else, an email queued to every tenant in every building I had just acquired, assuring them that repairs would be prioritized and rents kept stable during transition. The machine of the day was already humming. What even is it you do? Victoria asked, bored, pretending to peel a label from her crystal flute. I opened my mouth to answer. The TV in the adjoining room woke without a hand on the remote. A news anchor smiled a practice smile. The housekeeper looked at me from the doorway. Her eyes were wet. The pitch of the room changed, small, almost inaudible. It sounded like a breath being held by a city. The anchor's voice floated in, smooth as a sales brochure and twice as bright. In a stunning turn in luxury real estate, my father frowned, annoyed at the invasion. The remote lay untouched, a black rectangle on a pristine sideboard. The housekeeper didn't move. She had worked here before I could spell equity. She knew weather before clouds gathered. Global Towers International confirms a record-breaking acquisition. The anchor continued, graphics blooming behind her, skylines, portfolios, a figure that snapped the room to attention. 300 properties. Valued at $4.2 billion. Victoria made a small sound, half laugh, half squeak. Daddy, that's my phone vibrated once. Amanda again. Live on 10. 9. The house seemed to inhale with us. Sources also confirmed the identity of the previously private CEO, the anchor said. Sarah Winters. For a moment, there were 6 of me in the room, in the polished silver, in the glass of the cabinet, in the black phone face, in my mother's pupils as they widened, in the housekeeper's tears, and in my sister's reflection on the table's perfect surface where her mimosa began to tremble. Winters, not Bennett. I had changed the name quietly a year ago, paid the fee, signed the papers, practiced the signature until it felt like skin. It was not a rejection so much as an edit to reality, mine, not theirs. The crystal flute left Victoria's hand in a slow motion I would replay later on nights when I needed courage. It kissed the table in a high note, tipped, and poured a sunrise-colored arc across the deed she had just called home. The champagne soaked the paper and bled the ink into a blur. I didn't look away. Global Towers holdings include the Sterling Square development, the anchor went on, and the full Bennett investment portfolio. My father stood so fast his chair scraped a protest from hardwood. What exactly is this? He demanded, but the question collapsed in the air, too small, too late. I turned the phone face up and answered on speaker. Yes, Amanda. Confirmation across all registries, she said. City filings posted. Press released. Tenant notices sent. Mayor's office online too about Sterling's remediation plan. Do you want to take the board call now or in 10? In 5, I said. And have legal send the safety reports to the AG. Full packet. Victoria's face drained as if someone had opened a valve at her throat. How did you? By checking what you didn't, I said. I glanced at my father. And by fixing what you didn't want to see. The TV behind them cut to footage of my software's dashboard in a blurred-over demo. Heat maps flared where risk lived. Red dots pulsed where tenants had filed ignored complaints. Industry insiders credit Ms. Winters' proprietary platform with revolutionizing property management, the anchor narrated. Sources estimate her net worth at over $7 billion. My mother sat back down without realizing it. Her hand found the table's edge like a railing in a moving train. All this time, she whispered, but not to me. To herself. To the version of her that had chosen mirrors over windows. I slipped the thin envelope with its studio key into my purse like a souvenir from a tourism booth. I'll need the dining room this afternoon, I said, moving toward the door. Media team wants a shot of the staircase. The staircase, my father repeated, blink. For the announcement, I said, and paused long enough to let the truth land. It photographs well. 2 weeks later, the city had learned my name. Names are funny. They sit on buildings like crowns or on mailboxes like prayers. Mine now glowed from a tower that used to carry my family's V-sharp crest. Workers had taken the brass letters down at dawn. The patch of stone beneath them was cleaner, as if truth had been hiding under there, waiting for air. In my office, the glass stretched floor to ceiling and was thick enough to keep the winter wind's teeth at bay. Below, roofs stitched together neighborhoods that rarely spoke to one another. I watched a crane swing a beam toward the skeleton of a building that would hold families next year. My coffee was plain. The chair across from my desk matched the ones my father used to keep, because power does not require reinventing every surface. It requires reassigning who sits where. He arrived the way fallen kings do, with practiced dignity and small betrayals of panic. His tie slouched. His hands shook as he laid a folder on my desk. If you'll look, he began, and I let him talk because it was the last thing I still owed him, time enough to hear his voice in a room that belonged to me. The plan was desperate, carve-outs, partial surrenders, a plea to control what looked good in photos. Numbers slid in places where numbers should lock. I closed the folder. Sterling would have bankrupted you, I said. It was going to hurt people. We could have you didn't, I said, and turned the screen between us so he could see the photos. Exposed wiring near a nursery wall, a cracked beam disguised with paint, falsified inspection stamps. You didn't want to know. There is a cost to building quietly. The cost is absence. I missed friends' weddings and holidays that were staged like commercials. I missed sleep. I kept notes in my phone under mundane names. Grocery list held the names of inspectors who could be bought, mapped to dates they bought new cars. Workout held timer intervals that were actually target closing windows. I got good at smiling while the city roared in my ear. I paid the cost gladly. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Winters, your mother and sister are here. They entered as if gravity had increased. Victoria tried for posture and found only angles. My mother wore her pearls like a life jacket. We wanted to apologize, she said, and the word wanted did too much work. For what? I asked. They offered a handful of phrases, misunderstood, family, pressure, expectations. I waited. My mother added, we were protecting the legacy. Legacy, I repeated, tasting it, is not a synonym for habit. Victoria stared at the skyline like it had offended her. You don't have to humiliate us, she muttered. I didn't publish your mismanagement, I said. I sent it to the people who fix things when money pretends to be law. My father inhaled, about to ask for a mercy that would make him feel like a hero. I stopped him with a raised hand, then pressed a button. The holographic listings bloomed between us. Clean apartments, manageable rents, a studio on Cedar Street with a little balcony that caught morning light. The mansion will become an innovation center for women founders, I said. Full scholarships, mentors, legal aid, childcare on site. The things I never had when you called my work a hobby. My mother's throat worked. She nodded once, the way people do when they realize their reflection is not the whole painting. You can lease at market rate. I'll waive the application fees, I added, and my sister flinched as if the sentence were a slap. This is cruel, she said. We're family. It is fair, I answered. And if you had ever been this fair to someone who couldn't pay you back, I might be saying yes to more. The room waited with me for the storm to pass. It didn't. That was new. That was the point. On the day we opened the mansion's doors to contractors, I stood at the base of its famous staircase while the news cameras warmed their lenses. Dust floated like confetti in a shaft of light. The family portraits had been packed away, their expressions sleeping in crates. Amanda moved through the space with her tablet like a conductor. "Mayor will cut the ribbon at 3, she said. "The architect wants your input on the lab layout. Board call at 5. And she hesitated. "They're here." I knew who she meant without asking. Footsteps in the marble entryway carried the story they wanted me to hear. My parents entered, not as supplicants today, but as citizens, brought by curiosity or maybe by the magnetism of a world rearranging itself without their permission. "This was your grandfather's pride," my father said, looking up the stairs as if expecting a ghost to descend. "He hosted governors here." "Then it's overdue for something useful," I said, and nodded to the crew marking out a childcare space under the stairs where I had once been told children didn't belong. A woman in a hard hat passed by with a toolbox. She caught my eye and smiled. Behind her, a young engineer explained to a contractor why a load-bearing wall would need reinforcement if we were going to open a shared workspace. The word open echoed pleasantly in the high-ceilinged air. "Sarah," my mother began, gripping her clutch, "can we speak privately?" "No," I said, not unkindly. "Say what you want to say where the work is happening." She looked at the floor, then lifted her chin. "We were wrong. Each word was expensive. We taught you that power is a room you own and a door you control. You built a city in your pocket instead." I waited. Outside, a truck backed up. Beep. Beep. It was ridiculous and perfect. "I want to help," Victoria blurted. It wasn't a performance. Her voice shook. "I don't know what I'm doing. I've never known. I copied the shapes. I want to learn for real. Tell me where to start." The room tilted microscopically, as if a very large thing had shifted beneath us. I thought of every time I had wanted to be invited to a table and was handed a tray instead. I thought of all the women who would step into these rooms not to be tolerated, but to be funded. I took a breath. 1,000 possible futures arranged themselves in a second. "Start with the tenants," I said. "Sit in their meetings. Listen to what housing safety means when you're the one living under the ceiling. Twice a week for 6 months. No publicizing it. You will not be the story." She nodded, relief messy on her face. "Okay. And you," I said to my father, "will endow a legal clinic for housing violations and put your name nowhere near it. Anonymous. It will be staffed by the lawyers who once wrote your contracts." He swallowed. "All right." My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth, then dropped her hand. "What about us?" "You'll learn to live in a place you pay for at a rate you didn't set," I said. "It's good practice for democracy." A hush spread, softer than a bruise. The cameras blinked, waiting for an angle. I didn't give them one. I turned to the architect to discuss airflow. Somewhere behind me, my parents stepped back and stood together, small and human, in a house that didn't know how to be theirs anymore. At dusk, the city hooded itself in violet and copper. From my office, the new signage on the former Bennett buildings glowed a different kind of light, not louder, just clearer. I watched people pull their coats tighter against the evening wind, watched a line of kids cross a street in a chain, the littlest one pivoting to make sure her friend kept up. On my desk, the Forbes email pinged, "Final cover approved." The photo they'd chosen caught me mid-turn, between one focus and the next, face unposed. A strand of hair lifted. There was a laugh in the corner of my mouth that I hadn't registered when the shutter clicked. It looked like a woman who had remembered something she almost forgot, that winning is not the point. Building is. I lifted my coffee. No cut crystal. Just ceramic. Heat through glaze. Amanda slid in with end-of-day updates. "Scholarship applications opened an hour ago," she said, grin barely contained. 213 in the first 40 minutes. We pulled them up. Names flowed. Ages. Places. Fields. A woman who had taken 5 buses every weekend to finish a certificate in HVAC. A mother of 3 with a prototype for a modular ramp system. A coder 17 years younger than me who had taught herself C++ on a cracked screen. "Tomorrow," I said, We had a line for childcare stipends right at the top of the form. Already did, Amanda said, and set down a small box on my desk. Housekeeper sent this over. From the dining room. Inside lay the thin envelope that had once been my portion. The studio key lay winking in its paper sleeve. I held it the way you hold a seashell that still contains the ocean. That apartment had saved me. Not the square footage, not the address. The choice. The door I closed and the windows I opened. The space to build a system nobody believed could be worth anything until it moved the ground under their feet. My phone buzzed. A photo arrived from a site supervisor at Sterling Square, workers in harnesses tightening new beams, a toddler in a puffy jacket holding her mother's hand while pointing up at a crane like a dinosaur. The caption, "Safe now." I turned to the window, the city's pulse on the glass. Somewhere, my parents were unpacking boxes in a space that clicked when the front door shut and smelled like new paint. Somewhere, my sister sat on a folding chair in a community room and wrote down a complaint about drafty windows and asked a woman what it felt like each night. Somewhere, the housekeeper who had watched me grow up put on her coat and walked home in shoes that didn't hurt. Sometimes revenge is a hot flash. Sometimes it's a quiet redistribution of gravity. I lifted the key, touched it to my forehead like a blessing, then tucked it into a drawer with a label only I would understand. When the elevator chimed and the board filed in for the evening session, I stood, smoothed my suit, and took one last look at the skyline. "Let's talk about tomorrow," I said. Outside, the city exhaled. Inside, the room filled with people who had learned to check systems, to listen, to work in the light. And somewhere, a staircase waited for footsteps that were coming, carrying boxes of laptops, sketches, and the future in their hands.